So we're at that point of the day where the caffeine headaches are all kicking in. We really, really appreciate everybody being here and taking the time out of their fast day to come listen to this, what I think is a wonderful panel. So over the last month or so, the SCA has provided the Minhag of the Week program that we hope to do for a long time. And we've been privileged to have Joey Harari, Joey Mosseri, and Arking as the leaders and the men who have spent their entire lives dedicating themselves to the preservation of our customs, of our Masoret, of our traditions. They've spent hundreds, thousands of hours over Sifarim and spending time with Chachamim and learning in any way possible and experiencing themselves in any way possible what are the minhagim that express the identity of the Syrian Sephardic community. And so one of the things, just as a quick introduction, one of the reasons behind why we thought this was so important to do is it's great to be on the cutting edge of Jewish education. We just saw just now the panel between the Rashi Yeshivot, Rabbi Harari and Rabbi Sutton, where we want to be with all our heart on the cutting edge of education. We want to do everything we can to provide our children with the best education possible so that they can take that into the world with them and be the best that they can be. But what we're also concerned about is that they disconnect from their identity, and that providing them that identity incorporates, of course, learning Torah and understanding as much as they can about where they come from. But having a sense of of their traditions, of their customs, of their minhagim, and recognizing that that's the thing to be proud of. Being aware of the fact that that's part of who you are. It's been part of who you are, who your parents are, your grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and it goes back in some places and in some ways thousands of years. That's an amazing thing to bring along with you on your everyday journey in life. And so to provide that, and so our job, our goal, was to provide the community with a resource that they can take, hopefully, into perpetuity of our minhagim, our customs. Some customs might be simple customs. Some of them might be customs that incorporate a little more thinking, a little more activity. But all of them are driven by a desire to maintain their connection to their forefathers, to their matriarchs that over the last thousands of years. And so in that context, I want to introduce you today to Arking, Joey Harari, Joey Mosseri and Joey Harari. Even I get mixed up. I call them, we'll get to them. I'll get to Joey. I get to Rabbi Joey. I call them by their first names inappropriately. They all deserve to be called Chacham Yosef, Chacham Moshe, and Chacham Yosef. Moderating the panel is Rabbi Joey Mizrachi, who, aside from being a close relative of mine, and a personal mentor of mine, is someone who also has dedicated his life to knowing the Masoret of our people, and not only that, he's been teaching young children throughout, I don't know, the last, and I won't date you, but at least 20 years. So I don't want to date you. So the fact, and that really goes through my children. I'm sure a lot of people here, either they themselves or their children have been touched by Joey's generosity in the community and giving of himself to really promote and inculcate our children with a sense of their own identity and reading and learning and knowing about our tradition. So in that, I will hand it off to Chacham Yosef, and you can take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm sorry we don't have a mic. If somebody can't hear it, just please let me know and we'll turn up the volume a little bit. Anyway, Jesse just said something very interesting that I was going to touch on before we began, and that was a history of the community that we are going to be focusing on today. Many communities in the Middle East, especially the community in Beirut, the community in Cairo, had their origins in the city of Halab. What's interesting about that community is age. There are very, very few cities in the world that have hosted a Jewish community with the continuity and the history that the Jews of Syria, both of Halab and Sham, enjoyed. It's a history that dates back almost 3,500 years. Uninterrupted, except for a small period, maybe with the Mongol invasions, but otherwise, we have clear records of Yehudim in these cities for 3,500 years. There are very few Jewish communities on earth that can boast such a history, literally. So when we talk about Minhag, when we talk about what did these people do, it is not simply a question of the last 100 years, the last 200 or 300 years. This is a Masoret that is ancient and accompanied the development of Torah Shebichtav. It's an incredible, incredible thing. When you take the history, let's say, of the Hasidic movement, it only goes back to 1800, slightly before. But that's it. It's a small 250-year history, at best. This is something we're talking that's more than 10 times that amount. So we can't take what we're going to discuss today lightly. Now, the panelists, our esteemed panelists, have begun a project where they are making weekly small videos about different minhagim. And they've had a lot of views.
Sorry.
We're casual today, Katie, don't worry. After 100
This is casual,
jackets.
Joey.
I didn't know I was going to be on camera, on film, on tape. You didn't bring the tie?
Okay, now he's ready. Now he's ready. Okay. My wife always says, you don't do casual, you go to weddings. Anyway, before we do anything, I'd like to put a question out to the panel. And I'd like to ask you to give us, in your words, a definition of what we call minhag. There's a very, very gray area between Pesak Halacha and a minhag. Can you please define that for us? Give us a little light on that. Morris, you want to start?
So, Halacha minhag is something that was collectively accepted by a significant group of people. In this case, we're talking about the Jews of Aleppo, or sometimes it goes beyond that. It's become throughout several communities in the Middle East. And it's something that was accepted based on the teachings of their leading rabbis and passed down from generation to generation and survived the test of time with all the leading rabbis that they had over that time. So it pertains to halakhic practices. It oftentimes pertains to differences of opinion in halakha that were decided in a particular way based on the leaders that they had in that place throughout the times. And that's considered a significant way to resolve a question, that it had a collective acceptance and stand at the test of time. So that's how I look at what a minhag is.
Joe?
So honestly, what Morris said is true, but at times the minhag wasn't as simple as Morris made it. It wasn't always one collective minhag, but you would have, if you had various synagogues in a community, you may have various minhagim based upon how the hachamim that were in that particular knis or the hazanim that were there may have developed it or twisted it or turned it, to make it more beneficial for the people there, or how the people themselves, if they didn't feel that the custom that they were doing was something that they could perpetuate, they slightly tweaked it, but it was still something that was collectively agreed upon and followed by by the progeny going on for generations. It's something that was handed down to us and brought down to us that we see that they brought over 1900, 1920, and we're still doing things today over here that they did in a city that basically no longer existed. It practically wiped off the map, and we are the keepers of this torch. And that's what the minhag is for us.
When you speak about minhag, it's important to put them in different categories. Before you approach the question of what should I be doing, should I follow this minhag, should I follow that minhag? As Mara said, first and foremost, the minhag usually involved an halachic dispute where the hachamim of the kahal decided that our minhag, we are going to be noheg to be posek like one hacham over the other hacham. That's one type of minhag. That's not a minhag like we would call in English a custom. That's a minhag is how our community, how our rabbis instructed us, and how we have been being posek the halacha like this custom or like that custom. I mean, you can take an example in, let's say, Kohanim. Does the Hazan say first the word Yivarcha, or the God say? It's a dispute among the Pashtanim and the Kabbalists, so there's a halachic dispute. And we have a certain custom. That's one type of custom. Those are the type of customs which, at least personally, I choose not to swim in that sea, because that is left for the Hachamim. And Hachamim indeed do have the power, if it's a bet din of stature, or they do have the power to change a custom in a community that's based on a halachic reality that he sees the need for.
Can you give me an example of that?
I thought like what that they would change.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, like a custom in our community for many centuries, and not only our community, other communities on the Almeda, for example, was for the kahal says the beracha first, and then the hazan says the beracha. That's the way it was when I was growing up in Shari Sion. I was actually dismayed to hear in the last couple of weeks that may not be the custom anymore. But that's a custom, which was in many communities where the kahal would say the beracha, and then the hazan. You run into question because they didn't want to run into question if the hazan and the mechabanah says the hawah, again halachic issues. Comes Rabbi Harari ben Shimon in Egypt, right? He was the chief rabbi, a hacham of tremendous stature, and that was the custom in those days. However, he sees that after you get past the first week, second week, the kahal starts, one guy 16, one guy 18, one guy 19, and he writes it in Harari's time. He decides, he had that authority, he decides we're going to change the custom. From now on, the hazan says it first, and the kahal follows. By the way, that this change was done in other communities as well. But here's an example of a hacham having the authority to change a practice of many centuries. So that's one type of custom. There are other customs which could have been rooted in either sociological realities or, for instance, we have the custom to check the rice 3 times. Custom. All the women check the rice 3 times. But so that's, if you look in the halacha, you won't find that question, right? It's a custom that developed. So then we say, well, look at the realities. Why did they check it? Why did they check it? So these are there's a different type of custom, right? So today the authorities may say, well, because of the changing times and changing situations, it may not be required. Again, that's a different type of custom. Another distinction I like to make is whether a custom is a communal custom or a private custom. And if it's a private custom, what's my obligation to continue that private custom? Or like, for instance, I have the custom, not I personally, but for instance, I have the custom, my father, my grandfather, they made kaparot. Okay? It's a private custom. Again, it gets involved a little bit in halacha, but just give you an example. It's not a communal custom, it's a custom on an individual. I have the custom to read Tehillim in its entirety on Shabbat. That's what I do. What's my obligation to continue that? So the difference, so before the question is asked, we try to put them in kind of what type of custom are we dealing with? And after that, we can look into what the sources are, what the practices is, what we should be continuing doing, and so on.
Yeah, but I love the definitions, but I don't have I'm still foggy about what's the difference between when Hachamim will use the language of nahagu as a verb, as opposed to the noun minhag. what is the difference between kach nahagu and this is the minhag? In other words, vis-a-vis a pesach din. Is there a gray line there between a hard pesach din, or if you want to get even more specific, something Maran says to do, Shulchan Aruch is posek this, but many times we say, no, we're not nohei like Maran. So how do we do that? How do we differentiate that?
So, Maran himself, and you'll even find examples in Harambam as well, where they'll tell you that their understanding of the halakha in the theoretical sense is A, but the people were noheg B. And their clear intention is to say that you shouldn't be doing what the theoretical halakha is in this case. It's exceptional, and you should be doing what the accepted practice is. And it could be for various reasons why it became collectively accepted to do such a thing. But you'll have an example by, let's say, by Netilat Yadayim. So usually you always make a beracha before you do a mitzvah. So you should, before you wash your hands, say Al Netilat Yadayim and then wash your hands. But it became customary to wash your hands first, and then before you dry them, or Maran actually brings the custom is in between pours, meaning pour 2 times, and before the last one make the beracha, so on and so forth. So it could be for a certain opinion that existed in halakha, and they latched onto that opinion, and that became the accepted practice, and it ends up superseding what normally would have been the halakha in this case.
So you're saying it's a theoretical development of the law as opposed to what actually takes place?
Meaning theoretically the law would be A, but it developed in another way and became accepted, and the rabbis accepted it.
After the fact.
After the fact.
Joe?
I was basically going to say the same thing that Mara said. The only thing I wanted to add, you have a clear case in Shulchan Aruch. We're talking about beracha of lished basukah, or during Sukkot. Do you say before Hamosi or after Hamosi? And Maran Shulchan Aruch seems to say, say the beracha of lished before Hamosi, but then at the end he tells you about nahagu ha'am. And that is our minhag till today. We say the Lished Basukah in the end. After, like same way we would finish Kiddush, we would say the Lished Basukah, you finish Hamosi, you say Beracha Lished Basukah. So even though Maran wants you to make the Beracha Lished Basukah before Hamosi, he's telling you that's just clearly not what the people are doing. And this is what it is, and I can't change it. I don't have the power to change it, because the people have taken the halakha in their own hands, and they've decided this way based upon reputable sources. And this is what's going on.
No?
Well, I started by saying that the word minhag is not always used in the same fashion all the time, just like when Hachamim say nahagu. Nahagu could be nahagu this halakha, as opposed to this opinion, or nahagu a minhag, or nahagu it's a...
The verb can have a few different
Yes,
meanings.
yes, certainly. So there's it's not a gray area. Sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, let me take it one step further. This argument Morris and I have been having for the better part of 25 years. Yeah.
Which one?
No, I'll tell you right now. And it's apropos. I mean, today is a Ta'anit, and the whole Knesset is going to put on tefillin at Minhag. And my experience growing up in the Syrian community was to always put on tefillin. I went to Yerushalayim in 1981, and I walked into Ades Shul, and I put my tefillin. Acham Mizrachi made a very sarcastic comment to me. Oh, Hagiu Malachah Sharet, Hagiu. And I said, what? In Brooklyn, everyone does that. He goes, oh, in Brooklyn, that's the minhag. So I went home that night, and I called my grandfather, and I asked him, what is the minhag? And he told me, Fi halab, we never put on tefillin, ever, on the ta'anit. And I said, wow, really? When did that change? And he said to me, it changed when Chacham Yaakov Asin came to New York, and the minhag, he made, a pesach din, everybody should do that. And that's, little by little, the minhag changed. I said, oh, so I shouldn't put on tefillin? He goes, no, Chacham Ezra is right, don't put on tefillin. So I stopped. So for the next number of years, until the new immigrants, so the Halabi Ajdid came, and they were not putting on tefillin, I felt, vindicated, and eventually, many of the new immigrants also started putting on tefillin. And so one tiny tested, I put it on, Zaki Sadar saw me, and he said, Inte kaman, you also, you're going to give in to that? I said, no, I took it off right away. It's the first time in 20 years I put it on. Now, in Beit Torah, Morris Arking puts on the tefillin. So I told him what my grandfather had said, and I told him the whole story with Cham Ezra Shayo. What he brought me was a manuscript of Cham Yosef Shayo, Rabbi Ezra Shayo's father. He's saying, point blank, the minhag in Aram Soba is to put on tefillin on Ta'anit Zibur. I said, his son told me not to. So, how would you go when you don't know a clear minhag or halacha, and you get several opinions?
Call Morris.
How do you swim through it? Oh, I don't want to call Morris. Tried that. So how do you navigate unknown waters like that?
So you have to do your research. You have to check sources. You can't just find one source or go by one hearsay or have one person tell you, even if you respect that person. I also studied with the Cham Shayo, so I had tremendous respect for the grandfather, Aleichem Shalom. But when you do further research, you have to put together a whole picture. So you can't just al regel ha'at in 1 minute or 2 minutes always get the real answer. Here, beyond that manuscript, we have other sources. We have a source from Chacham Abraham Hathaway from the 19th century, of Chacham Zafrani, who was giving you the customs of the great synagogue of Aleppo. So when you corroborate through different times, different sources that are not necessarily connected to each other, and you can see a pattern, and then you figure out that perhaps the minhag changed in Halab in the more recent times. Our community started coming here. My grandfather came in 1901. Another grandfather came in 1905. This is before the custom got lost in Aleppo, and therefore it's not something that was necessarily introduced by Hakam Yaakov, who came from Israel. Interestingly, the custom in Israel, when Hakam Yaakov Kazim was growing up, was to put on the tefillin. It was like halab, at all the places put it on. But it's not necessarily something that he brought because it was from Israel. It was something that was observed in the Middle East and might have fallen out of observance gradually. So,
So you're saying educate yourself,
you
navigate
need to look at a lot of sources. You can't just go by one person or one book or one thing that you found. You have to put it all together.
Okay, Joey?
That's absolutely correct. You have to look into the sources. The sources, obviously we have, if you have those elders to go to, you go to them. But if we have sources, we have manuscripts, we have books, we have writings of eyewitnesses from 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and they wrote things down. It's there for us to study. It's not, they didn't write it down just, okay, let's shelf it and let's collect dust. It's there for us to study and to learn from it and to put it into practice. So that's a key factor over here. We can see the Beit Yosef himself, Beit Yosef Karo, talks about this custom. He says you have to have, complete the 100 berachot every day, and he did the calculation on a fast day. You can only complete 98. The only way you're going to complete 100 is by 1 berachah for talet, 1 berachah for tefillin. There's your 100. And from there, you have the Knesset HaGedolah talks about it, you have Hayim Parachi talks about it, and Hachamim throughout the Sephardic world talk about wearing tefillin on the
How do I know the difference between the theoretical extension of the law and the minhag? It's written. That doesn't give me...
But they were doing it. If that it fell out of use, now that's the question, is why did it fall out of use? Was it stopped on purpose, or did the people forget the minhag? That's the question. And
It could be neither.
it could be neither, but usually it's one or the other.
I'm sorry, but that's a hard thing to... Unless there was some sort of an upheaval, right, or a real disturbance where people were moved or massacred.
They were moved.
Hold on, that's why I opened up by saying, when we talk about the minhagim of Halab, you have a real even keel. Now there were different turbulent periods, but on the whole, there was a lot less movement than Ashkenazim had to experience under Christianity. They were kicked out of everywhere every 15 minutes. That somebody decided to make a pogrom or an expulsion. That didn't happen in the lands under Islam. As with the same frequency, certainly. So they had a much more steady base, on which to base things. But my question really is how do we tell? Look, the easiest I'm going to give you is the Rashi and the Rabbeinu Tam, the Tefillin.
I'm not gonna get
Okay?
into that.
No. Forget it, no. But the Shita of Rashi, which is attributed to Rashi, was Shita of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam didn't know what his grandfather's Tefillin was. Open them. Obviously, it's not because there was a Safek. He was sitting in the house with Rashi. He could have opened up his grandpa's Tefillin. So it's ridiculous to say it was a Safek. But here, when you have Sefekot, where people don't remember, not something like Tefillin, open the Tefillin, open it, it's right there. From year to year, sometimes people, things do get lost, right? The whole Tikiot and Rosh Hashanah, difference between the Teruah and the Shevarim and the Tashrat, is all only because we don't know what the sound of the Teruah is. That's why we have 30 kolot. It's all misafik. Okay, so that's a definite something that was lost. But something that, Tefillin on the Ta'anit, how does something like that morph and change?
So, the first thing you have to realize is that when you say Minhag Halab, very often there were multiple minhagim within the same practice in Halab itself. It wasn't 100%, everybody did the same thing. So therefore you see sometimes, even now you see the different halabiyeh who are all sworn halabiyeh, they have the badge of honor, they have the yahus, and they do the two different things. Okay, fine, happens, it's not the end of the world. Some people hold the shishiyot and don't shamar, some people don't, some kiss, some don't, some hold two, some hold four, some so it's not all right. So the main, but something you said that you have to understand, things did change. Even in the last 100 years, dramatically they changed. Why? Because people left Halab. They left from 1880 onwards. Some stayed in Halab and they started, I was talking to Edmond yesterday, they read a lot more Ben Ish Hai in the last 30, 40 years. They were doing like the Ben Ish Hai. They weren't doing that in the turn of the century, last century. So things changed in Halab in the last 30, 40 years, right? Also, some came to Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim, you didn't go to when the Halabiya came to America or Buenos Aires or this. They came. There was nothing there. There was Ashkenazim and them. All right. There's nothing really in common with the Spanish Portuguese, and they were in the city and they had money, so it didn't really work out that way. Right. So we would have to fend for our own. We made our own community.
Minhag, New York.
They came to Yerushalayim. 98% of the particular is already built. Schools or synagogues already built already. Everything's harder for them. This Hachamim, this. But what was there in addition? There was a heavy influence of the Mekubalim and Yeshivat Bet El in Yerushalayim. So Hacham Ezra Shayo, I know of no thoroughbred Halabi and from a rabbinic family more than Hacham Ezra Shayo, Alam Shalom. He would say Haftarah on Minhag Sha'be'ab, unheard of. Unheard of. I said, I'm not paying your membership this year. Unbelievable. So what is this? And then I go to the Knis Minhag Sha'be'ab. The first year when I made Aliyah, it was the year 2000. There was me, a few Argentinians, a couple of Mexicans, a Brazilian, Halabiyah wearing tefillin, and the locals weren't wearing tefillin. So I guess at the end of the day, what you say, what's a person to do? No, the average person is not supposed to do the research because there's no way to do the research, and not it's not like opening up Shulchan Aruch, so it's not as easy.
I know the whole Aleppo is not to putting it. Obviously, the thing changed, so this becomes
No,
a
but it
minhag
didn't necessarily. But it did that. So when something becomes a minhag is when you go to Knis and you go to Shas Shul and there's nobody putting out tefillin. Then I'll tell you the minhag changed. The minhag didn't change.
No, but he's saying in Aleppo there were different k'nayos, and one had this minhag, one had that minhag down the block.
Nobody was wearing it there.
Yeah, so no, they were putting it. They were putting it on.
That's not true.
The point is the whole idea of keeping the minhagim. Why? And we didn't get into why it's important to keep the minhagim. I'm not going to get into it now, but besides what Jesse spoke about at the beginning, just to understand where you come from, the responsibility you carry with you, knowing that as minhagim change, people come and start criticizing you. Oh, how come you're not doing this? How come you're not doing that? And you say, wait a second. I'm doing what my father did, my grandfather did, what his father did, and they were exceptional and thousands of hachamim. So to come and say that I'm not doing the right thing is really insulting to my heritage. I'd be proud of my heritage. That's all understood. Another important thing about minhagim and why they should be kept as much in uniform as possible is to avoid mahlokin. You come to the Knis, we don't want mahlokin. That's the last thing you want in the Knis. You do this, I do this. So we generally keep them in. If a person comes to Knesset, he knows exactly what he's going to expect. He knows what's going to happen. And that's the shalom is more important. So to come and whether you put it on tefillin or put it on, I don't think you should fault with anybody about I'm putting it on, I'm taking it off, I'm putting it on.
Not just Morris.
No, the bottom line. The bottom line, if you don't have to be the custom, if that's your custom and you've seen it, that there's people putting on, you don't want to put it on, don't put it on at the end of the world. You know, but the.
Okay, let's talk about shalom and the end of the world. I learned an interesting lesson. We're going to open up questions in a minute. A number of years ago, I was teaching Hilchot Pesach. Actually, my first year in Beit Torah. It was 1994. And we're using the book Hazon Obadiah, and it's a beautiful book. Hamad Obadiah Yosef's, sort of idiot's guide to Passover. It's a fantastic sefer, and I try to go through it every single year. And one of the things that he talks about is when they point at the table, Masa, Zo, Maror Zo, but you say Pesach, Shayu, you don't point to the Korban Pesach, you don't point to the Zeroah. Okay, and there's, of course, reasons of halakha, because it looks like you're eating sacrificial meat outside the Beit HaMikdash, and that's haram. So there was a man sitting there, and he said, my father always said, Pesach Zo, and he pointed to the Zeroah. And I said to him, I was very inexperienced, your father's wrong. And, yeah, okay, I learned the lesson very quickly, how to be nicer, and how to, but the man was insisting, and he was flipping on me, and my question to the panel based on that is the following. If you have a minhag that is clearly a minhag ta'ut, but it's very widespread, how do we deal with that?
So halachically, minhag ta'ut is supposed to be nullified. So, if it really is a minhag ta'ut, that you really did the research and you can't.
What's ta'ut?
Ta'ut, I'm sorry. Minhag ta'ut means a minhag that is based on an error. That is something that is done in complete negation to halakha, not a different variety of halakha, but an absolute error that is against normative practice.
For example?
But the one I just said, where a man points to the lamb shank on the Seder plate and says, this is the korban. That is absolutely forbidden to do. Right. So this man told me, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear, this man told me, my father did that every year. And I said, your father was wrong. So now what do we do when we encounter minhagim that have developed in error, or people think are minhagim in absolute error? Panelists?
Right, so if something really is a genuine minhag ta'ut, meaning that somebody was qualified to do the research, did the research, and he established that it is in fact a ta'ut, and he's traced it, and it says absolutely ta'ut, so then the halakha is clear that you nullify that custom. But what happens often in our community is that certain people are studying books, like they might just look in Hazon Obadiah, they might just look in Mishnah Berurah, and they'll see you should do A or you should do B. It contradicts what we do here. They're not qualified to do the full amount of research, and they automatically assume it's a minhag ta'ut when it's not, and then the custom changes or they change the custom. So, that's really very much what our project is about addressing those issues that have been corrected in the last 20 or 30 years and trying to show that there was no need to correct them. And in a case where something is a blatant minhag ta'ut, Hathaway Yosef deals with people that say, Al achilat matzah, every time they eat matzah throughout the 8 days. This is a minhag ta'ut. Or someone once told me that he remembers that on Leil Kippur, before he's eating the Seudat Mafseket, his father would make Kiddush. There's no such source for making Kiddush. So these are clearly minhagei ta'ut. You could be diplomatic when you tell them that this is a mistake. But
Thank you, Mark.
But there are many cases where I'm talking with people that are 20 or 30 years younger, and they're trying to tell me, you're doing this, it's a ta'ut. My grandfather did this, and that was clearly not a ta'ut. We could present the sources and the rationale for them, but it's not easily accessible to everybody, everywhere, especially amongst the younger students.
I don't know if I want to, if it really falls into the realm of Minhag Ta'ut, but let's deal with something that we practically all see every Friday night when people stand up Kiddush Friday night and the Chadudi, everybody flips around. Exactly. I don't know if it falls into the realm of Ta'ut. It's definitely not Minhag, so it's Ta'ut for our
The next point, I was going to get to that next, actually, so save that.
I'll save it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We need a whole session.
Yeah.
We'll be here till Shabbat.
You mentioned Minhag Ta'ud as something which is widespread. Obviously, if it's not widespread, then other people will correct it when they see it. Minhag Ta'ud is a minhag which has indeed been widespread, and the Hachamim have a dilemma. They have to stop it. And they're not always successful. They have to try at least. There's a interesting minhag, which is Minhag Ta'ud, and I'm going to offend a lot of people here, and I was looking forward to this moment.
Welcome to Brooklyn. What are you doing now?
You want to take off your jacket?
No, I can't. What did you say? No, I forgot what I had to. Mars was talking about the purpose of the project that we try to fix things for the next 20 years. I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm trying to 50 years from now that the ones who still have a semblance of what our minhag is, at least they can go back and say, yeah, look, Joey Mosseri on the tape said we could do this. It's a repository for minhagim. But now minhag ta'ud is something which things change. I mean, from when I met Ali after 20 years ago, come back, things change. I mean, I come back, at least once a year or so, and some things shock me, some things don't. But things do change. It's amazing. And I went to one knis last time I was here, and I was shocked. Now, because when you're living in Israel, especially in Yerushalayim, you engage with dozens and dozens of different edot, different communities, and everyone has their interesting customs, and you learn to appreciate their customs. There's one custom. I'm not going to mention the community because I don't want to say anything disparaging. There's one community. You go into the knis, and it's one big kissing fest, like Woodstock in the knis. Just kissing. Guys look up to the Sefer. Everybody's kissing. Now, halakha meforeshet, it's asur to kiss somebody in the Beit Knesset. There's not one posek that you're going to find that's going to allow it. Lo and behold, I go into one knis. I don't want to say which knis. And the same, I was kissing. Unbelievable. Now, the Hachamim, why does it bother me even more? Because we never had that custom. The only kissing that's allowed is when we kiss the Sefer Torah, or when the son kisses the hand of the father or the grandfather, or that goes up to the Sefer, because that is also commanded by Borei Olam to respect the father and grandfather in that way. But what's with all the... So, in Israel, Hathaway tried. He tried. And there was another couple of Hachamim that tried very much to undo this Minhag Ta'ud, and they failed. So it continues. But this is an example, Minhag Ta'ud that's widespread. Hachamim make an effort, they succeed, fantastic. They don't, what are you going to do?
Okay.
Yeah.
We all love each other that much.
I don't really know how you feel about that. You want
We
to
all love each other. It's good.
No, I love you too, but nice to do. Shake hand, now they do fist bumps, they do this. They got the Yankees. Everything became like the Yankees. What happened? Hazak Baruch, shake his hand. That's what we used to do in Halab. We shook the hand.
Now, I want to move on to something a little more phony, and I want to get your opinions on this. Joe, you say you come back once a year and you see sometimes new things. Okay, well, Judaism was never, static. It is dynamic. It is ever changing, and sometimes you have a minhag that develops and becomes very widespread, but the minhag actually is very damaging. It's not innocuous. It's not something We said before the minhag of counting the Omer where the kahal counts before the hazan. There's a certain reasoning, there's a certain logic behind changing the minhag. But once something develops, and it becomes almost a superstition, right? How do we, as leaders of the community, react to it? I refer to the minhag of baking a key in bread before, during Passover.
That
Now,
was Minhag Halab.
no. I was never in halab, and I'm telling you, it wasn't the minhag of halab.
No, he meant minhag chelm.
I want to give you another example that I saw in my lifetime. Now, this key in the challah thing is a Hasidic minhag.
It's Christian.
I don't want to go there. It is a Christian minhag, and I actually saw. I traveled to Eastern Europe extensively and saw it myself. But I'm not even asking that. 30 years ago, I was at a Pidyon Haben, and they picked up the coin, and my grandfather was sitting with me, and they started auctioning. He said, "Oh, Hadish Dide." They found a new way to raise money. They found a new item here. All of a sudden, this became a segula. The coins have holiness. They get you married. They'll get babies for you. They'll get you parnasah. There's a list you can tick off. All right. This minhag did not exist 30 years ago. It did not exist, and now it has become the norm. The norm. I was sitting with my grandfather 30 years ago when we saw it as though this is a brand new thing. Wow, they figured out a new one.
Yeah.
They got a new one. And today it is become and supported by the rabbis. In fact, I saw one person once stand up. One person once stood up, and I saw him hold the coin, and he said, "This coin gave me luck." And the rabbis that were present did not react or say anything. Now, this is one minhag comes in direct negation to Torah values. Okay, where do we draw that line?
Let me just state one thing here. This is not something that started 30 years ago. It's something that was started by Hacham Siyor Maslaton Alav Shalom. He was the only Kohen rabbi in the community. So he did practically every pidyon in the community. He said, "What am I going to do with all these coins? Let me at least auction them off and get money for tzedakah," which he used to give out. He never said this is sigula. He never said it's magic. He never said it's good luck. He just said, "I'm trying to raise money for tzedakah," and that's how the custom started. So that's where it came from. It's not something that was done with this purpose of creating a sigula.
With the Shoam, maybe.
Yes,
Not-
but he was the rabbi of the community.
He was a great man.
He was.
Great man.
Morris, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so, this is something that's really, up to the rabbis to make the call when something, developed in a negative way, that they need to get together and they need to stop it. I had a case where, we have hazanim that they go up to pray, and then they refuse to say Kaddish, because they don't have permission to say Kaddish, and then they just walk and they leave, they just walk out. There's nobody to say Kaddish. Now the truth is, the Kaddish should be recited. But yes, there is precedent in halakha, even Maran talks about it, where parents are superstitious and don't give permission to their children to say Kaddish, and the person becomes obligated to respect his father. But when I was confronted with the situation, I said, yes, it's true, you can't disrespect your father, but the rabbis could teach the fathers to give permission and not be superstitious. In other words, the rabbis should be getting together to, try to take away from the superstitious beliefs and approaches of the people. So if the parents give permission, then the kids could say Kaddish, and then you can have a semblance of a minyan, regardless of who the Hazan is.
That's actually a very, very interesting example, because my minhag is not to say Kaddish to my father will love me, but halakha is Kaddish is part of the slot.
Right.
So
Then you don't become. Then you don't hazan. Then you don't hazan. That's all.
listen,
No, you don't hazan.
gentlemen, I'm telling you, I'm a teacher in the elementary school, and for years, the kids from other rabbis in the school, they just go in Menhaf, Namnaseh, Adel Shabbat. I said, well, what are you doing? It's Kaddish. No,
Permission.
we have no Abilim. I said, it's not up to the fact if you have Abilim or not. It's part of the tefillah. And
I mean, that is a valid view in the Ashkenazi world, but if there's not, they'll just say it's
okay, but it is not valid if the kid's last name is Gindi. You know, it's not valid, and the minyan is
You
all.
want to say halakha, but there's a halakha that the other way too, meaning there's halakha that says it's not part of the tikkulah. You don't have habel, you don't say kaddish.
And we're not Moheg that way.
Okay.
Now you got Moheg, Joe.
Joe, you want to comment on that?
Not really. I mean, it's not. That's not a problem of a minhag. I think it's a very positive thing to auction the coins off and raise money for tzedakah. Better than have the coins just sitting.
Yeah, but you can't switch, it's not gonna save your life.
No. Raising money for tzedakah for those who are willing to give is always a noble thing, and it goes for a good cause, and it's very nice. And the zechut of the mitzvah will be for the person who donates the money. The whole issue of how it develops into a superstition, it's out of our hands. Let the hakamim, not let the hakamim should deal with it.
I've seen people buy it, they can't afford it either.
Well, they shouldn't buy it.
Yeah.
Then we should educate them on another
No,
field.
they
We should have
think
financial
it's gonna
plans.
save your life.
Economics 101.
Huh?
Economics 101.
That's not an issue of a minhag. That's an issue for a hakamim to educate them. But I think in all, it's a nice.
Okay, so let me ask you. We're gonna open up the floor for questions, but I'd like to ask you guys, our panel, a final type of a question or make a statement, right? And I want to ask you, what is the value? Joey brought up a beautiful point that it's the preservation of shalom in the Bet Knesset, obviously. But what is the value in preserving minhagim and heritage? Why not? Who cares? Let the Hazan get up, read Asakar, read without, if it's Mahur or Rast or Ajam, who cares?
I care.
What is the? There's 5 of you in the room. I can still count. Okay. Now, my question is, what is the value? What is the value in us preserving minhagim? Why don't we just all, do Miami Boy Choir tunes on Shabbat?
You're heading in that direction, Bob.
No, but I'm asking you seriously. Why preserve our minhagim? What is the value for a community, for the individual, of preserving minhagim? Morris?
So if you talk about some of the type of minhagim that I started with when we began, halachic minhagim, where there's a difference of opinion, some poskim say to do A, some poskim say to do B, and you do the research and you see that the established custom in halab was like A. And if you just discard that, it becomes a free-for-all, and each person, each rabbi, each individual is just going to do it based on the limited research that he did, or what makes sense to him. And Judaism is not an individual religion; it's a national religion. And to the extent that we're a cohesive group, we should be doing the same thing, and we should be coexisting with each other, and not just everybody doing what makes sense to them, or in this shul that makes sense to them to do it this way, and in this one that way. Well, what 1 week I go here and 1 week I go there. Why should there be mass confusion in the community? That, and also the fact that our religion is based on an oral tradition, that which is handed down from generation to generation, and that's what gives it authenticity. If everybody just woke up one day and decided to do A or B or C, where's the authenticity in that decision, and why should I follow that?
I think it's almost the opposite, though.
In which
If
way?
you're trying to get a national unity, right, of the Jewish people, then the individual minhagim of each individual community should be dropped, and we should have this one gray type of Judaism.
That could be a point that's made, like, let's say in Eretz Israel, where you have Idot all mixing together and all interacting with each other. And Hakamat Yosef, for the most part, that's why his attitude towards Minhag is what it is, because he felt the need in his time, in his place, in order to create unity. But we don't have that here in Brooklyn. We are the Syrian community. That's our heritage. That's our forefathers. We're not mixing with all different types of other communities, and therefore it's incumbent upon us to preserve our traditions.
So you're saying when we do make Aliyah, we should not?
That becomes an excellent question, because if people go as individuals, they blend into where they went to. It's only if they came as a community and formed a community. If we all went en masse and took a town or a place and made our own thing, perhaps you could preserve your traditions. But practically speaking, if everybody just goes at the time that they want to go, they become part of the community that they're in.
We're looking at a piece of land outside Modine. Joey?
So minhagim are what shape us. They are basically what defines us. It's our borders, it's our guidelines. It keeps us together, it keeps us as a cohesive group. Because once you take away the minhagim, we're no different than anybody else. And we start fitting into other places, or we let others in without any connection to the past. And everything that we always have been stressing throughout our lives, everything that we've heard from our parents and our grandparents is about how great our heritage is and who we came from, what stock we're from. And this is something that's very, very key and instrumental in keeping us together as a group. Otherwise, we just wither away and we see what has become of other communities. They no longer exist. All the great Sephardic communities that came here at the same time that the Syrian communities came at the turn of the 20th century. You have all the communities that came from Turkey and from Greece. Where are they today? They're gone. They're withered away, except for one stronghold left in Seattle, Washington. All those that came to New York and settled throughout New York and New Jersey, completely gone, disappeared. So minhagim are what keep our identity in something very, very important. Otherwise, in another 20 years, there won't be a community anymore.
Joe?
The question is way too broad, really, to address it. It's way too broad. There's so many reasons why the minhagim are crucial. You mentioned one, it connects us to our past, it's reverence to our Hamim, to our poskim that lived for thousands of years. But what I like, there's another element I want to tell you, there's an element of a certain feeling that you can't really describe it in words. You ever realize why the tunes on Rosh Hashanah Kippur never ever changed? Not the Sla, not the tunes, ever, cannot change. A lot of people used to come to Knis once a year. Not everybody came, some people came once a year, Rosh Hashanah Kippur. And there's a certain feeling of familiarity, of home, and it's the same thing on a day-to-day basis. When you keep the customs, besides the shalom issue, besides the heritage issue, when you keep the customs 20, 30, 40 years from now, a person can go back into that knis, you don't know what it could do for him. There's a certain feeling that things are right. If you don't do Da'atum Zimah, like Dishak and Shabbat Yitro and Shabbat, something's wrong. I can't explain it. No one can explain it. If you don't do Shemor Bimir and Shabbat Kala, something's wrong. Something's not right. There's a certain pride and identity that you have, that you belong to something bigger than you. And if you don't have really adherence to the minhagim, that's going to be really it's going to be not going to be lost immediately, but first it's going to be diluted, and then eventually it's going to be lost. And one thing you said about the heritage, my students know from Israel that whenever I first time or second time I meet them, I ask them, who they are, who their father was, their grandfather was, their great grandfathers, and what's your great grandmother's maiden name, and all questions like that, because I think it's very, very important to know. And when they go up to the Sefer, I was goodbye, and someone would go up to the Sefer and make sure to use their whole name. So Salem would come, Salem Nakchari would come, and Mamiyat Dabah, and everybody has and Khodri Abud, and everybody has a name, and they can't forget who they are. And one of the ways they don't forget who they are is they don't forget how they do things and how everybody collectively does the same thing, more or less. Very important. You can't put enough emphasis on keeping our minhagim.
I'd like to add just one more thing. I think that most of you know this, who know me know this about me. History is important. And a person's personal history is of paramount importance. When a young person is searching for an identity, right, there's no better place to look than back instead of forward. If a person has grounding, if a person has a particular way that they live their life, and our halakha is all encompassing. It's all, we do everything according to halakha. Waking up in the morning, going to the bathroom, eating, sleeping, drinking, marital relations, everything is controlled by halakha. But halakha is sometimes limited in its scope. It doesn't get down to the minutiae, to the particulars of the exact moment of contact. And that's where minhagim come in. And minhagim define a sense of the flavor of different things. As you mentioned, datum zemach. Yes, if I went to Knis, Shavuot, and I didn't hear that tune, I would be upset. But we have thousands of halachot about Shavuot, but nowhere does it really say datum zemach. If I didn't read the Azharot after lunch, it would not be the same hag to me. It would not be. That's a minhag. Reading Ibn Gabirol is a minhag, it's not halacha. So minhag defines our taste for life and connecting life to halacha. I think that's the most important thing, that it gives the children a sense of the future and where to take it. And we'd like to open up the floor to questions. Young lady in the white.
Thank you all for a very lively, entertaining, and informative panel. This is a question for everybody, but Morris, you mentioned that when there's a dispute or halacha b'ta'ud and somebody's trying to figure out what is the right thing to do, that they need to consult books and sources. So my question is, how do you view the future of Judaism in that sense, when now we have a situation where we have the internet and new media and self-publishing, and really everybody and anybody has a voice. There's no gatekeeping of who gets to set down in stone, so to speak, what they think is the right thing. So people 300 years from now looking back at what is being written now, today's dummy is 300 years from now is gadol. And people will look back and maybe not be able to tell as easily. 500 years ago, unless you had access to a printing press and were an esteemed person, you couldn't actually put something down for generations. But now everything is wide open. So how will our understanding of minhagim and how people perpetuate them change given this new reality?
I mean, I would say hopefully at that point, there will be people smart enough to differentiate between somebody who's just a blogger or, who just, created a video or something else like that, or somebody who was an esteemed authority from that generation. So, it's going to be up to that generation to be able to differentiate between sources. And even now, we differentiate between sources. Even if you're looking at halakhic sources, what was considered more authoritative than what was considered more accepted than what. So, true, it might be more difficult at that time, but I think that the same principles would apply.
Saul?
Yeah, I have a question in regards to what Joy Mosseri said. You said Sukkot, you had a question whether you say L'Shem Sukkah before or after.
Right.
And then you said either, I think Shulchan Aruch wrote it, and then Harambam. So what rabbi had, my question to you, I asked you last week, who changed it? Why would it be changed if you have Harambam and Shulchan Aruch wrote it already? Which rabbi had the strength to come along and say, we're going to change it? Why? Where is the change? Why did it change? If Harambam said it, it's who could fight with him? Who could even? So what? My question is, I asked you last week, where did the change come? If Harambam wrote it and Shulchan Aruch wrote it, why change? And who changed it?
Well, it really depends on which particular minhag you're talking about. So let's take Harambam, for example. We're dealing Harambam is strictly a work of halacha, and Shulchan Aruch is a work of halacha. What gave Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of Shulchan Aruch, the right and the authority to change halacha from what Harambam wrote? And many times he did. He didn't stick to Harambam exclusively. So he also changed. He had a different way of approaching halakha based upon what he called the Shilosha Amudei Hora'ah, the three pillars of ruling, the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh. So he had his way. But other than that, there were so many other Rishonim, and they had their own view of halakha.
And had the weight to fight or to change what he said. He was the authority.
He was the authority in the communities that accepted him. In other communities, they accepted other Hachamim as the authority. As people blended, and especially when you're dealing with the expulsion from Spain, and those communities had to leave northern Spain and southern Spain, and they started emigrating to the Ottoman Empire and to other places in the world, each one brought the rulings that they were following in their cities of origin by those Hachamim that were there. And now sometimes they came at odds with the rulings of Harambam. So what do we do now? The people are noheg, as Joey wanted to talk about, noheg, according to the Ritbah, for example, but they came now to a land of Harambam. Well, now we're an entire community, as Morris mentioned, entire community coming en masse, as Morris said. And so what do we follow? Harambam, who was Marad Atra, the ruler of the land, or the Ritbah that were following his Pisakim from someplace else? And that's how things started to change.
So, just one other thing, when we say Spain, in the year 1400, there is no Spain. The way it exists today. There was, on the Iberian Peninsula, there were 12 different nation states. Right? They consolidated in the 1460s when Aragon married Castile. They had a united Spain, and that was, before that there was nobody spoke Ladino. No one. Ladino was invented as a way for the Jews that were exiled from the Iberian Peninsula to communicate with each other in some pidgin forms, pidgin Spanish. There were many different dialects of Spanish. So when they came and they ended up in Istanbul and no one could speak to each other, they developed this language called Ladino. Nobody in Spain spoke Ladino. It was a product of the expulsion. So the Minhagim, same thing. There was a million different cities, and each one, there wasn't communication like there was today.
But it doesn't matter, if Harambam said something, whether you're in Spain.
They burned his books, though, in Harambam. Not everybody agreed with him. In the Provence, they had, the 100 years after his death, they burned his books. Yes, Doc.
I'd like to make two observations. One, just like that young lady in the front row said, I don't know her name.
Lenore Cohen.
It's not such an easy thing to say that 300 years from now, we hope to know what the true ways were, because just as an example, many of the sidurim that we use today have changes in words on every printing, and most of us have some access to the tan siddur that we all know what we're talking about, to go back to look, did we say the Tzipino was during the Amidah, did we say these things? So even in the small amount of time that I've been around to watch all this, I've seen these changes clearly happening, and I think that we are at risk, even though this is a small example, for losing our particular ways of doing it. Now, the other point is that, like Mosseri was saying, our communities in Harab were not just a singular community. As we know, the expulsion after Spain introduced the whole Spanish community over there, and there was much infighting that happened for hundreds of years. So I'm sure that many of our questions on Minhagim come from that point. The last thing I would like to say is that I'm going to take a particular minhag of when I was growing up, whenever there was water out at night, if that wasn't fully covered, thrown out in the morning. But if it was covered, no problem. So I'm sitting in a shiur by a rabbi from this community, and he's going through this, and he's saying, some people have this silly custom of doing this, and there's no basis for it. He brings down the Shulchan Aruch, and very erudite on how he dissects everything. And I raised my hand. I said, I've done that my whole life. My family did that. My grandparents, the whole thing. And all the Halabi who were in there said, yes, we do the same thing. So part of this. Okay, but he was dissecting it and going the other way with it, whatever it was. But part of this is that there's today a certain rationalism going on with the Hachamim, who point out many of our minhagim, saying, when they did that, they were wrong. They didn't understand it. And that really goes against a lot of the things that we are saying today. So just an observation.
Comments on that one? No.
I recently learned, maybe last 10 years, maybe more, I noticed on Kabbalat Shabbat, people started putting their back toward their house and looking to the door when they're Kabbalat Shabbat. I don't know when it started.
Joey said it started flipping.
And today more and more people are doing that. They're looking at you like, why aren't you doing it? I don't know where it started from. Do you have any basis for where the thing started from?
It's a Kabbalistic custom that originated with the observation that the Ari used to go out to the fields, right, and face the setting sun in order to accept the Shabbat. It evolved after that into the custom of turning around for Kabbalat Shabbat towards the west, where the sun is setting, so we know when to accept the Shabbat. I'm not gonna get into the debate about the custom, simply to say that it was never our custom at all. There are some communities, like the Egyptian community, the last, only on what's the word, the last few words?
Also in the question.
No, Moikala, where they would
Left and right.
to the side, some would turn around, even in my day, some would turn around, but that was the extent of it. I pray in Adis Knis, and from Mizmor David till after Rosh Shabbat, they're facing the other way. They're facing west. Again, because of the influence of the Kabbalists in Yerushalayim was very, very strong. It was almost hard to escape it. I mean, it's simply not our custom, and it really shouldn't be practiced only because you're doing something which nobody does. Why would you do something which nobody does? You're not supposed to do something which is at odds with what everybody else does.
If you stay facing the Echel now, you're the odd man out.
Well,
That's
that's
how
sad.
it's
Stay facing the
It is
Echel?
sad.
That's very sad. No,
It is
it's
sad.
You see fish in the Lord of it.
Jesse?
Yeah. So on a more generally speaking, we speak about Minhagim and its importance in creating unity and this feeling of connection. But how do you deal with I guess more of today's generation where we could look at something like that and it has the adverse effect? So, for example, the creating unity. So you're walking into the Bet Knesset, so you see everyone putting on tefillin. On the why isn't that already the minhag? Why do we have to revert everything back 20, 30 years to see what we used to do instead of just letting what everyone is doing right now be the minhag, and that's the unity? Or from a different perspective, going to praying in tefillah, we have all these ma'amat, which are beautiful for someone that really grew up around it. But for the younger generation, they want to hear some more modern music, which really is what the ma'am with the pizmonim serve by bringing that. Who's stopping me?
No, you can
No,
have.
do you have any,
You hear it all the time. I'm
We
not a
always
big fan,
do it.
not my taste, but you hear it all the
It's
time.
not it, but there's nothing to do with the. Right. So minhag by definition is something that evolved to a certain point, and why are we so strong on taking a stand and letting it stop here and not letting it evolve any further?
Well, it's as I said before, it's shaping who we are. If once you start letting it change and making it free-for-all, then it's no longer minhag, and we're no longer a community, and we're no longer connected to the past. And all the flavor that Joey talked about, and the halachic parameters that Morris talked about, basically are all pushed aside. So what do you have left?
There's another thing. People tend to default to doing more. You know what I mean? And besides the problem that these, again, not our custom, but you go through prayer, and I see it in others because we have Kurdim and Arking and all kinds of other communities, and I make sure as much as I can to say no, we don't say Le David after the prayer. No, on the Tanit, we don't have that extra Mizmor after the David. Baruchu, no, we don't get up. Modim, we don't stand up. Ta'amida, Hazara, we don't have to stand up. Takadosh, we're going to sit down. And he said, well, you guys do nothing. You don't do anything. One extra word. They take it. Yahazdecha, we took it out. Before Ashlev, we never said it. The Hazan doesn't say this. From Halabi, so we never said it. I'm not saying this. Don't say it. So, but the point is that people tend to think that if they're being made to feel that if they don't go the extra mile and don't do an extra thing, that there's something wrong with them. You know what I mean? But that's who we are, and now we're under attack for like everything we stood for. This is hatrasa. This is what they call classic hatrasa against our hakamim. We came from communities, there were thousands of hakamim, thousands. To come and now say that what I did, it wasn't enough, it could have been more, I could have did that. This is all insulting to our hakamim. It's insulting to your grandparents, to your great-grandparents. So there's got to be a point where they say, stop it. This is what we do. This is who we are. And the community singled out for tremendous scholarship and torture by Harambam. Singled out as which city? Halab. Haram Soba. So take pride. Take pride. You want, I'm not saying you want to sing songs from Phantom to the Opera, have a nice day. I don't care, very nice. That's what the Hathaway wants to do. He gets a little bonus, someone gives him a little tip, they're fine, okay. There's no rules regarding it, I'm just saying. That's who we are.
But why can't the minhag just be when you walk into the Beit Knesset and you see everyone putting on tefillin? Why is that not the minhag?
Jesse,
Wait,
can I answer this one, Jesse?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have to differentiate between certain things. You know, evolution with minhagim is going to happen anyway. It's beyond any one person or any group of people. So evolution is going to happen by itself. But what about addressing cases where the people themselves grew up with a certain minhag and they discard it out of their ignorance? Shouldn't there be anybody that wakes up and say, hey, what are you doing? You grew up, you ate zeroah on the night of Pesach in your house. Now you looked at Hazon Ovadia. I was against that custom, but it's a totally legitimate custom. So now people are not eating it, or they're fighting about it, or they're saying you have to boil it. Shouldn't somebody get up and say, no, this is a legitimate custom, you grew up with it, you don't have to correct it. There's many, many cases like that. You'll be seeing them coming out on a weekly basis.
Thank you for that. I want to just say one more thing in that regard. There's evolution and there's revolution. Right? Evolution is when things develop in a natural way. But there's a definite downside to the latter. And that's caused by ignorance. If there are young people who would rather see a contemporary song because they don't know Arabic music, or because they were never taught Arabic music, that's a loss, and that's a shame. If someone says, look, I'm an expert in Arabic music, but I want to add the Phantom of the Opera to the slot, please, we should welcome it. We should. But when we sell our heritage for 24 shiny trinkets, that's sinful, in my opinion. That's sinful. And that starts at the earliest age. That starts as soon as a kid can speak. It starts as soon as a child can read and write. And there has been a conscious, concerted effort to steal it from us for many, 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 many years. How many children today can write in Nus Elam? They can't read what the Chachamim from 100 years ago wrote. They can't read it. We're not capable anymore. I think Joey once completed an exam in Nus Elam and the teacher failed him for it. I'll never forget that. Right? Just to get the guy.
Rabbi Harari.
Okay. But I'm not taking. Rabbi Harari was an educator and a great teacher. I loved learning Torah from him. But at the same hand, our minhagim are really shunted to the side. And so a kid who's cognizant and old enough to understand things says, you know what? Why can't we sing V'hayed Enenu in the slot? But he doesn't know Mipiel. That's sinful to me. That's a shame. We should respect all minhagim. Yeah, no problem.
Teach them in school.
But that's a great idea. I don't know. Anybody want to add to that? Yeah. I'm an advocate. I promise you.
They don't have it in the curriculum.
Teach it in the house.
I don't want to comment on curriculums and that was the forum before this one. And I wasn't here for that, thankfully. Grace?
So this is my question. It seems that across the Jewish world, in Orthodox communities, not just ours, there's the idea that's been taking hold that the more machmir, or the more suffering, in a sense, that someone can do to fulfill a halacha or a minhag, the more religious they are, right? We know this. This is happening all across America, also communities in Israel. The more machmir you are, the more religious you are. And we also know that that's not so true, because it's not always what the minhag is to do it the more machmir way. How do we combat this mentality, which can eradicate minhagim?
You didn't see our other video from Rav the Week Club?
Because it doesn't exist. That's why you didn't see it.
Perfect for you.
That's all we're doing. That's exactly all we're doing. Listen, first and foremost, a person has to look in the mirror and like what he sees. That's the bottom line. You have to know who you are. That's all. Once you know who you are, everything else is easy. You know where to go to, you know where to study from. You just know who you are. Be proud of who you are. Embrace all of it. And by the way, you can never respect another tradition or another community unless you start respecting your own. And when you respect your own, you're going to see real beauty in all of the other Aidot. You really will, because it's very beautiful customs and liturgy, and in all of the living in Israel, you have the advantage of really getting the best of the best from all of the different communities, and it's a great thing. But if you don't respect your own first and foremost, then you'll never develop into who you should be during the army.
Next question, Rabbi.
So, sort of a practical question. It came up with me in the last couple of days. I was actually going to ask Joy, but now I get four opinions instead of just one. If someone who does not have the same custom as the kahal comes in to pray in the kahal, or comes into someone's house, right? Now, let's say they're hosted by somebody. Now, there's three people involved. There's the person that comes in, there's the host, and there's the kahal. How do you deal with somebody who has a different custom? In this case, the boy that came with us to shul, Ashkenazi, he doesn't put on a talet. Not married, doesn't put on a talet. Now, as the host, should I say to him, he should put on the talet? Is it proper just to simply respect his way? And the conflict that I had when I was thinking about that is, what is the kahal going to say or think about somebody who's sitting there without a talet? And so I was wondering if there's a general rule for shalom, essentially, of how people should approach this from those three standpoints.
I'm just saying, this is a halachic question which is outside, at least in my realm, so I'll pass it on to. It's a question of how you're supposed to act. If I go into a Ashkenazi synagogue, how do I act? They stand up for Kaddish, do I stand up? They say the Kaddish, do I say the Kaddish? So it's more of a halakhic question.
There's also customs.
But this particular question is in my opinion at least, is a halakhic question. So I'm more than willing when we get home to start looking at the source and see if we get anywhere. But if anybody wants to answer it, maybe
The general principle is when you go the general principle is when you go to another congregation, you shouldn't do anything that's disruptive. But if you do something that's not disruptive, so for instance, if I pray in an Ashkenaz shul, but I know the Amidah according to my version by heart, or I have a book with me, or they happen to have a book with my version, I'm not disruptive by praying the Sephardic Amidah because I'm saying it silently. But if I would go up to be Hazan, then I can't say Kaddish according to my Nosach, if their Nosach is different. So the general rule is when you're participating with another group that has certain accepted ways of doing things, you can do your own thing if it doesn't disrupt what they're doing. But I can't answer Nakti Shach if they're all saying the Kaddish out loud. If I would want to say Nakti Shach, I would have to say it very quietly so that nobody would know what I was saying.
Okay. We'll wrap up. Yeah.
It was quite fascinating. I was actually, my family's Ashkenaz, so I was here for last Shabbat. So basically, like, when you go to the Kiyama, you daven Shacharit or whatever, basically, you're not wearing tefillin. And when you say Kaddish, they also say you have to say Kaddish. It's very different when you're saying Korbanot or you're saying something before the regular davening. So basically, like, I'm sitting there like, oh, what's it? It's very interesting what they're doing over here, you know? But I believe, like, if you're wearing kippah, no matter where you are, if you're Flatbush, Bar Park, Buncy, anywhere, you're wearing kippah and the kehillah is respectful, then it should not matter.
Here.
Before we close, I'd just like to say thank you to Jesse Salem for putting this together, and for Jesse Sutton. I'm going to have contact.